Over the last 10 years, our guest of honor spent most of his professional time working with leaders and peers on rethinking culture and IT mindsets. During the global pandemic, he embarked on a whole new journey by shifting to a new industry, the airline industry, which, as you know, was severely affected due to COVID restrictions. In this new industry, he is serving as the Director of Technology at the very acclaimed American Airlines. As he joins us today at the DOIS for the very first time, he is going to walk us through his journey at American Airlines. He shall be focusing on disruption that is centered on people, bringing product owners to engineers to a new mindset. He'll also be discussing enablers, anti-patterns, and some of the thought processes around continuous transformation in small doses. It's time to deep dive into another interesting conversation with the dynamic speaker, Mr. Jason Walker.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Jason Walker. I am with American Airlines. I'm going to jump into some content about my experience in these last about 15 months, where it's been a progression of taking learnings from other organizations that I've been involved with and looking at some of the things that we've done within the DevOps world and looking at the idea of disruption in small doses. A little bit about American Airlines, born in 1926. Depending upon detail, it's the world's largest airline. There's a lot of great innovation that's come from American Airlines over the course of 90 plus years. And we'd love for folks to take a look at some of the history that's out there out on AA.com. A little bit about me. My DevOps journey is really started back in the 90s, probably well before the term DevOps was there. And it's always been a passion of making use of IT as a means to philanthropically be able to help people, help my customer, my consumer, be able to find use in a product and be delighted with it. Currently, I'm a director in the technology space. Here's some ways to get a hold of me. Would love to chat about things, whether it's LinkedIn, follow me on GitHub, and I'm on Twitter for the most part as Desktop Hero. The purpose of this and around disruption is I do want you to panic, and it's just for a brief moment. And I want a sense of panic to set in, because a big thing that is happening, that has been happening, is the idea of disruption. Disruption for many organizations, many markets, is something that has been happening, whether it is within a market space where there's been a disruptor to change the game in the way that a particular market, a technologies, set of technologies is fundamentally changed, or there's been external to that market where some of the more prolific names in that market have been disrupted by outside changers. And now the big thing around this idea of disruption in small doses is my place in part at American Airlines is to look at how we can bring small bits of innovation through DevOps and a means to be able to disrupt the market that we're in positive ways and be a changing force. To look at just a little bit of context over the course of little over the last decade, if you think about it, it wasn't that long ago that there was no iPhone. And if you think about the changes that these little pocket computers have made, things like Airbnb and Uber over the course of a couple of years after that revolutionized the way that people would do local transportation, that would look for vacation places, and being able to then sprawl out from that business model into Uber Eats, Uber Cargo, being able to look at different ways to be able to tap into travel and hospitality. Moving even further into things like Internet of Things, even though it was coined prior to 2010, but Internet of Things it became very popular in context to system integration, being able to move computing to the edge. With things like Alexa, there's voice has been brought into a combination of Internet of Things with no longer needing a tangible interface that's in your hand and being able to use your voice for home automation, for interacting with systems, and being able to make different pieces, different things happen within a complex system, simplifying that interface. Jump into this year, there was a great event that happened where Blue Origin was able to launch essentially a private spaceship with people on it up New Shepard up into almost space and back down. So when we look at the types of disruptions, what technology is affording and the acceleration, it's something that we definitely need to I definitely encourage everyone to take a look at as far as what are those small things that you're able to start to do in order to manage disruption in the marketplace that you're in. So now let the panic subside. We'll get back on track. And I really want to focus in on self-disruption. And this is where over the course of my career at Target, at Cargill, now at American Airlines, it's been encouraging, evangelizing, and hopefully the benefit of my fellow engineers that I work with, inspiring them to think about the way that they can approach self-disruption in different ways. So the small doses piece, so disruption in small doses, there are a lot of little ideas that can make big impact, and an opportunity for any company in any market to be able to start to connect those ideas, connect those dots, create a safe environment, whether it's psychological safety, experiential learning safety, or being able to look at how you're able to redo some of the bedrock items within your company, within your marketplace, is really a seeding ground for the types of transformation that we're talking about. So to pivot a little bit around those doses, those small things, and to say, okay, great, there's these ideas that we can bring forward. There are some big tangible things that within the leadership space really can go after to make it to where those little ideas can start to inspire and turn into actual deliverables that teams can go after and bring features to the market so that your customers continue to be delighted with your product. One place around the idea of change is incorporating a product model. This isn't something that is just words or terms or a shift in some behavior. It is fundamentally going after and combining things like business and IT and making sure that product and that product mindset is something where you don't look at execution in the context of project. It isn't about start and stop. It is about a feature and being able to provide small bites of that particular feature to a market in order to understand, explore, and get feedback from customers on what the right next thing is. Oftentimes in that project space, the start and end dates are the things that are driving the actions and behaviors. And you can see time and time again that late projects turn into issues and concerns that change the different type of scope and outcome that eventually will come from a transformation. Another success indicator around the change space is being able to establish a financing model that ties back to product capabilities. This over the course of time and over the course of an evolution of a product, being able to establish that there's value around product capabilities and to continue to fund innovation around that product is a great way to then on the counter side and to balance that financing model to say when there's no more value in a particular product or just capabilities of a product, being able to pull that back and understand that it is okay for that particular set of features because there's no value. Customers aren't using it maybe, or it's no longer applicable. It's something that you're able to pull back and stop the idea of prolonged investment. And then the last bit of successful indicator around change is transformation metrics. Transformation metrics, if you think of like KPIs that help to share and shape mean time to recover, delivery cycle time, things that you can pick up from like the book Accelerate. These are, you no longer go to, you shift away from metrics that are about here's where we at this particular update, but start to look at trending over time to understand that the long haul of that product and the transformation metrics that it is producing back into the company is no longer based upon particular milestones or dates or driven by dates. Those milestones turn into usage and capabilities that are being delivered. The other piece around directionality when it comes down to what top-down type influences and decisions can have on a transformation and disruption is to understand that North Star message, that guiding set of outcomes that say this is where we're headed as a company in the market and where ways that we want to disrupt. They're described and acknowledged around the idea that starting places for each of the product teams, each of the individuals, each of the organizational groups are all going to be starting from a different place. And that the pace for them to where they're starting to get to where it is that they're after, that speed and in some cases the direction is going to vary from team to team, from squad to squad, from product to product. But nonetheless, understanding and getting it to where there's a point around whether you're since I work at an airline, whether you're on a jet plane or you're starting on a skateboard, the core thing is that you have to start. You have to have that North Star message and be able to set up a set of success indicators around the pivot points that are going to make that transformation and disruption successful, and make sure that it's clear that teams are in a position to be able to move at the pace that they're able to afford. I mentioned a couple of different places that I've worked at, and one thing that I've learned when it comes down to going from one company to another is that I'm not necessarily I'm not able to, and I would not encourage. I would actually discourage the idea that you're able to take what you've seen at some other place, whether it is you were directly involved or from a distance perceived, and think that you're going to be able to copy and paste that approach, those actions and behaviors, and as part of the change in path towards disruption, establishing that North Star, understanding the change that needs to take place within financial models, shifting to product, is that the journey is going to be yours, and that your company, your organization, your market is potentially unique in where you are. I have here on this visual the idea of uniqueness being greater than cargo cult, and that cargo culture being just because you mimic the behaviors of what you potentially see externally doesn't mean that you're going to be able to benefit from the same type of outcomes. You do have to find your own way, but be able to and understand that making choices based upon external information are data points along the way. They're not necessarily going to be, and don't expect there to be, a clear set of steps that you're able to follow and get to those same outcomes. So one of this is kind of derived from, if you're familiar with Star Wars, Yoda has quotes, and one of the quotes of unlearning what you have learned is one of those pieces of you're going into a transformation, you're going into disruption, is to look at yourself from a different lens and take a look at the way that you would approach problems that exist today as part of that transformation, as part of that disruption. I do use and lean on, it's from the mid 70s, OODA loops: observe, orient, decide, and act, as a means to think about a particular problem or a situation or some sort of outcome that my group, my organization is looking to go after. And instead of going in with old assumptions and status quo, and not going in with, well, it worked at this other place, it's using what is happening in the moment, looking at past examples to say, is this something that is an option? And if it is an option, feeling safe and comfortable to bring it up to my team, to my organization, to say, as part of a small experiment, are we able to make use of this other approach, understand what type of metrics and what type of measurement we would look at to identify success, and then move forward. That can mean defining some specific scope, defining some specific time parameters, or understanding what it means to say, we've exhausted that particular approach. It's time to pull the cord. It's time to cancel. It's time to say, like, that is not the option that we're going to follow, and then be able to go back into that OODA loop. So one of the things in going into this is feel comfortable about unlearning what it is that you've done in the past, and realize that going forward, as part of disruption, as part of introducing new things, you definitely need to be in a position to for yourself, feel empowered to go after that. There's a website called rebelsatwork.com. And one of the things, looking back at my target days, one of the things that was formed was the idea of a rebel alliance, a rebellion, if you will. I mentioned before about those little ideas, identifying and understanding and creating a sense of community, grassroots, organic, or something where it is out in the open. Building on top of and understanding where you can start to connect different people, different groups that have ideas of being able to disrupt and move your company forward. It's actually forming the idea of a rebellion aligns to some of the positive things about what makes up a rebel. So with permission, I was able to pull an image from Rebels at Work. In rebels, not referring to rebels like troublemakers. It is rebels in the sense of people that are after going through and performing to their best, making it to where they're able to bring others along, that they stay focused in on what those outcomes are, and are in a position to be able to, in this case, for like the first example here, change rules. Instead of it being following what the rules are and in a disruptive way, being able to say, what is a different path that we're able to do to encourage some more innovation, to encourage ideas to come to reality, and make it to where those opportunities that could and should be something that is highlighted, we're in a position to be able to in isolation and understanding blast radius, get those rebels, get those people that are pushing forward, get those groups that are ready to take on new challenges into a place where they're able to do that. Now, there are some things to balance out here when it comes down to disruption, because one thing we don't want to do when we're operating a company is to become so disruptive that we do affect customers. So there are some guardrails around establishing and setting up a safe place for disruption to occur. One of the things that I've done and have encouraged and have worked with others within the architecture space is to go through and identify what are some accessible standards. We want to make it to where instead of there being the idea of review boards for approval to move an experiment forward, that we're very clear about what the guardrails are and understand that we need to be able to, as an architecture leadership team and group, is be able to be more clear and continue to improve on the communication around what is considered flexible and what's considered reversible. And the two are kind of combined. And what I have here on the visual, if something is concrete, and if you're familiar with RFC 2119, it uses some terms that say the adherence to the way that you implement something has varying degrees of requirement. So I'm using a little bit of that to say, if it's concrete, meaning it's not reversible, it's something that impacts the company, it's a big decision, you must do certain things as part of your product, as part of your technology team, as part of your deliverables. But as you move closer to something that has more flexibility, because the reversibility is high, and I use the term like Legos, those turn into more of like, you should do certain things a certain way, or you can do certain things a certain way. In some areas, when it comes down to different types or different alignment around, let's say, architecture, between business architecture, security architecture, application architecture, those standards around what must happen are usually something where it's perhaps it's something to the effect of like PCI compliance. Like, your application must remain PCI compliant if it's in scope. However, on the flip side, if your application is outside of regulatory compliance and it's something where you're in a position to be able to introduce A/B testing, blue-green deployments, be able to try features, then the shift towards the right to be able to introduce and understand in this small part of your application, these are the things that are acceptable. So defining and understanding, and as I have here, things that people are able to read the standard and that machines are able to act upon it becomes really important. To put it into action in a little bit of visual here that we share internally is, we want to make it to where our application, our product teams that are building new features, when it comes down to things like continuous integration, way more choice about the way that they want to go after integrating things like automated tests inside of their product. Instead of it being hardened about the type of framework, for example, that they have to use, it be really focused in on ways to do and investigate exploratory testing. Maybe chaos engineering gets introduced. As you move from left to right into continuous delivery and continuous deployment and get closer to production, we funnel those options down and make it to where it is more clear and more opinionated about what is required in order to get to production. We'll talk a little bit about things that we're doing to make this easier for our engineers to not only be able to adhere to this, but then also be able to get really clear feedback about if there is an issue, what do they need to do? But this is just an example of where we're able to, via standards, provide a place where teams are able to try new things, try experimentation, and as you get closer to production, it becomes more refined about what the expectations are. That leads into guided choice. So now that we have a set of standards, things that you have to adhere to, whether it's policy or it's down into, it's fine if your application is of a certain size or certain scaling, certain resiliency because of impact to business. We now want to make sure that it's really clear about things like guided choice. This is around the tools and technology, some of the data, some of the process, that we want to make sure it's really clear and open to all of our engineers as a community that the decisions, the discussions, and the opinions are really clear and out in the open. One of the things that we leverage, it's a mix of ThoughtWorks has a technology radar. They publish it. I've got the link here. And it's their disposition and opinion on where certain technologies fall within a framework. We leverage this to a degree in order to have similar discussions internally on where we see different applications or different technologies, different data, maybe data frameworks, or the way we want to approach data or process like CI/CD, so that we have these guardrails in a place where people are able to easily find it. And if it's something where it's stale and it needs to be updated, they're able to come into GitHub. They're able to go through a process very similar to opening issues and following a pull request workflow in order to engage back with the community about changes that are needed. To make the information a little more easy to follow, we do publish internally a site using MKDocs, another open source tool, to present content, to describe an introduction of maybe the technology domain, the ambitions about why we have this particular section the way it's carved off. So if you take, for example, like infrastructure, compute, containers, maybe 3 levels in, and we describe in our ambition section, like, why did we put containers here? Why do we care about that? And make it to where it's just easy for people to follow along. A little bit of a template, so that way it's like the same for each section, but then also make it very easy for people to find. Much like the technology radar that ThoughtWorks has, we do map our technology to 4 rings, including not the droids, which is sort of dare I say, like a fun thing that our engineering community decided, instead of like things that we want to stay away from or we want to retire because of end of service life or different activities and events. Not the droids is what the community came up with, and it is actually kind of stuck and it's part of the vernacular. So when people bring up a particular version of a tool or something where it's an application or tech stack that we're looking to retire, we hear all the time, or whether it's like in chat or verbally, I thought that was not the droids, or like maybe we should move that to not the droids. So I only highlight that because by having the community describe and define the label, it is sort of taken off to where even if people are saying it sort of tongue in cheek, they are saying it, and it's that at least is resonating a little bit. So guided choice, pretty important. A third element to establishing the safe space for disruption is to have some principles and patterns. Easy to follow principles that can be applied to the different large domain areas within IT, very important. I call out data, technology, and process, but those aren't the only specialties within something like architecture. What these principles allow is that teams are able to understand at a high level what's reversible, where does flexibility and versatility come into play. For example, at the very bottom here, I've got simple and standard and secure and available. Now, two different principles that we talk about. And the way that we lay out those principles is we include a few bullets on the description. We want to talk a little bit about some of the implications if in order to make sure that, for example, secure and available is applied, that also means that we are auditing things like access to a particular data set, or that we are making use of and understand that we have to enable a set of capabilities for us to be able to keep things simple. So we want to make sure that it's when there's something either in a business context or in another area around principles or in the architecture space, if there's an implication that we feel like we want to call out and make sure it's clear, that we're able to do that through establishing and publishing principles and patterns. So now I want to get into a little bit, this is probably the meatier part of the content, and that is about some results and real outcomes. This is all specific stuff at American Airlines that we've done, that we're continuing to do, and that we look to make use of as a means to help describe internally what the moving parts look like around disruption. So here, I'm going to talk a little bit about Runway, Tower, Inner Source at American, open source, and then our tech blog. So with Runway, one of the key things that we realized and understood is that in order to change and establish a place for our product teams and our engineers that are part of the squads associated with the product, is that they need a place, they need a portal, a platform, a place for them to be able to go through and quickly spin up the right technology with the right governance, the right controls, and self-service in a way for them to be able to accelerate beyond filling out requests and actually getting to where they're able to ship code. Runway is that place. We refer to it as our developer experience platform, and it's actually part of our developer experience product. So Runway, it is rooted in Backstage from Spotify. That is the core of Runway. And one of the things that we've done is we've used that and then a fairly simple and standardized way to be able to abstract American Airlines intellectual property, like the sugar we want to bring to Backstage, so that it's something that means something to us, and abstract that away. So that way we're able to continue to do things like add features and stay up to date with the upstream open source project, and do it in a way that is not invasive to our developer community. So a couple of things with around Runway and some of the capabilities. We have been able to bring to light different ways for teams to create and manage their applications, anything from websites to APIs. There are other types of applications or components of an application, but we've been focused in on a lot of the web and service type of calls. It also represents a place for, once something is created, a fairly rich and robust catalog for people to do discovery against APIs, against databases, against different types of components. And we're investigating things like, how can we make use of Runway as a means for us to be able to do discovery about things like Docker images that we want to make sure are available and known across our IT community, so that people don't have to recreate these artifacts that are reusable. And I'll talk a little bit later about inner source, but we do publish and promote inner sourced projects and the artifacts that are available through the catalog and through other Runway interfaces. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. It is a marketplace for all of our IT teams to bring the self-service offerings from these different teams that are outside of developer experience. So outside of our developer experience product, there are other teams that want to do things like make it very easy for you to access our data platform, or for engineers to access our data platform. So it's the data platform team that actually manages and maintains a set of plugins that make it very easy for their customer base to come to Runway, to get access to Orion, which is what we refer to as our data platform, be able to access the data platform, be able to manage data ingestion, all through self-service, and then be able to do things like expand into other other access requests that may be needed. Like, yes, I've got access to the data platform. Here's my data ingestion. And I need to be able to interact and integrate with this other system, like an API. So I need to be able to manage and maintain the permissions. Perhaps it's an AD group, or it's a role that's associated with it. So all of these are different parts that these teams are able to bring into Runway for self-service. So it's not like I go in and fill out a form and then wait for somebody to pick it up off the queue and then they interact with some other portal. This is all self-service, API and data-driven self-service for our development community. The last piece, and it's highlighted here about create an application. We have been investing quite a bit in the engineering side to make it to where, and we use the term batteries included. Batteries included application deployments that include, and it's not exclude. This isn't an exhaustive list, but includes web app firewall, includes SSL, DNS is part of the deployment, because we're deploying into an environment that we're able to instrument telemetry components to get application metrics, application logs. That comes with the deployment. It is no longer a separate action that the teams have to do. We refer to these application templates as blueprints. So the blueprints that people are able to create, our developer experience product team, they maintain a set of blueprints that include all of these batteries included types of deployments. But we also make it to where the community, anyone at American Airlines, is able to create their own blueprint, consume some or all of these different parts in order for them to do things like quickly get a microservice with the right set of framework, or the right framework, the right dependency, et cetera, and be able to spin up that microservice the way that their team is building their microservices. So it's an opinion with an initial start of like, here are the guardrails, and then teams are able to, within those guardrails, refine these blueprints into the way that they are looking for their way to production. Tower is another developer experience application, and it is an API-first feedback tool for teams as they are going through the continuous integration, delivery, and deployment cycle, that during deployment, we want to give them rich feedback about things that they need to do to make sure that their application is ready for prod. And it isn't necessarily a decision about like, should it go? It is feedback about potential risks or vulnerabilities or other types of metadata type components or metadata attributes about their application that need to be checked off for them to take off. And it's a little bit of a play with, in order to launch on the runway, you need to check in with the tower. Is a little bit of the play there around why it's called Tower. Tower being an API, one of the things that the teams did in regards to making it very easy for all of our product teams to consume this and start to use it is we set up enabled pipeline actions, shared libraries, or other components that they could pull into their CI/CD pipeline. Nobody really had to do anything other than add a few lines of YAML or JSON into their pipeline in order to start to consume and make use of Tower. In the early going, this just started in June as far as the initial feedback or the initial setup. The initial feedback just checks that they're making use of the right squad name and the right application short name in our CMDB, so that we're able to start at least identifying and making sure that metadata about a deployment is accurate. We do follow an approach in that we want to provide meaningful feedback with warnings prior to anything that would actually block a deployment, and to be really clear why that particular deployment may have been blocked, and that feedback is actionable by the team that received the feedback, and not just there was an error, you need to figure it out. A common thing that I have found in the organizations I worked in is that managing things like CVEs, if you fan it out and say all the product teams need to manage these different CVEs, turns into a lot of little activities, similar activities that those teams take on in order to remedy the same vulnerability. With Tower, what we're expecting to do is to be able to provide actionable feedback that will short cycle the amount of time it takes for those teams to figure out what they need to do, because we can give them very specific feedback on actions to take. So instead of Googling, how do I fix this CVE for this particular language, us be able to provide the feedback that says, this is the issue that you ran into. Here's the thing that you need to do. And here's a place for you to be able to go to get additional help internally, because we have identified a certain set of actions that will fix this for you. Yeah, so Tower, it is built into and available for all of our product teams. I've got a couple of numbers on adoption rate. Again, it started in June of 2021. And so far, very simple feedback. But one of the things that we're definitely looking to do is make more and more things actionable. If you're not familiar with the term inner source, I would recommend doing a little bit of research on what inner source is. At American Airlines, we do follow, for the most part, what you would find, I believe it's innersource.org, an approach to internally being able to provide and produce projects, libraries, and other artifacts within the IT space that are reusable, that are composable, and for the most part will make it to where it's easier for you to get through product feature deployment, because somebody within the company has probably already solved the problem that you're trying to work through. Inner source, we did a tech blog post. I've got a link here on it. I think when I started about 18 months ago, I think we were at about 40 projects, and right now we are right at about 97. The types of projects I'm referring to, we have projects that share and show specific implementations that make it very easy to do things like incorporate our single sign-on integration in the way that for a web application, making use of JavaScript or TypeScript, a way to be able to manage single sign-on with just one include statement and a few lines of configuration detail, and your application will be able to integrate with our identity provider. So instead of there being multiple teams trying to build a web app and manage single sign-on, it becomes a couple lines of code into the project that you're already working on to be able to make use of this approach that we're able to as a community, to maintain, to safely version, and make available to others. We do similar things with Terraform. We include inner source as an option for teams that want to publish and document out to the rest of the organization, a place for teams to be able to share and show and find code bases that are maintained, that are already working, and are able to potentially make it easy for you to move forward with a particular feature that you're trying to build. We do have an inner source marketplace. It started out as a standalone website and API, and the folks that maintain inner source marketplace made a great call out of incorporating that into Runway. So our developer experience platform, our developer portal, is now also the place that that our engineers are able to go to find inner source options to be able to look at ways to solve problems. So it's another great way for teams to be able to share and show how to move quickly towards getting past solved problems and be able to get those features out the door to delight our customers. Since coming to American Airlines, open source has been a thing that I've been pushing on. There are a lot of passionate folks around open source at American Airlines, and a differentiator in any company that I've been at is that when open source is well understood, that a policy that an easy to use and easy to execute against policy is understood, that the advantages that open source can bring to innovation, to experimentation, and to accelerating teams to be able to go as fast as they are safely and sanely able to handle is a great differentiator for introducing disruption, safe self-disruption. So at American Airlines, we have organized a working group. This includes not only folks within information technology, like engineers, architects, but other stakeholders. That includes, we have folks that are at least in the wings around corporate communications. We have folks that we tap into it around legal. In the cyber risk space, we have clear channels to folks and encourage and incorporate their feedback in the way that we manage and maintain a policy, that we manage and maintain a way for our engineers on American Airlines time contribute back upstream to projects that we have found not only do we get value from in our implementation, but that we feel like we're able to participate and help influence and drive a direction in those open source projects. We do make it clear as part of the policy about expectations. For example, if you are making use of a library, let's say in any type of language, that as part of your repository, you're managing and maintaining and tracking the open source projects that you're pulling in specifically. This does lead a little bit to well, my project has this other dependency, and then you have this dependency tree. The key part about managing and maintaining that listing of these are the open source projects, even the dependencies of those other projects, and keeping it close to the repository makes it easier for us to be able to get visually through some quick searches who maybe has a particular library associated with their own repository or project. This makes it just easier for us to be able to, in the event we see that there's a vulnerability, if we see that there has been maybe a change and a pivot away from one kind of open source license model that an open source project is using, and they're pivoting towards a different model, that we can make an informed decision about our continued use of a particular project, a particular open source project, or be able to manifest a right set of actions and directions for what's right for that product to be able to continue to use that particular project or open source in general. We're always looking to make improvements around the process as a whole for open source at American. One of those improvements I have here is evaluations as code. There is a scorecard, literally called Scorecard, from the Open Source Software Foundation. And it enables you to be able to establish a set of rules about an open source project, and then use Scorecard to evaluate that project against those rules. So if we, for example, want to mandate, and just arbitrarily, like we only want to accept MIT or Apache v2 license models for open source projects. Not that we do, but like, let's say, for example, we do, that's what we want. We can make use of Scorecard to give us feedback on an open source project that somebody is looking at evaluating as part of not only their product, but also wanting to go to production, to give them feedback on the acceptability of that particular project and why. So when we set those rules, we can be very clear about why it's important. And lastly, on open source, our tech blog, we had a great post around American Airlines and loving open source and talking a bit about the journey. And again, there's a lot of passionate folks. And this is where finding and uniting those passionate folks and rallying them around this particular idea and establishing the guardrails about open source is an example of using it as a means to self-disrupt as we journey forward. Our tech blog, this is another passion project where we want to be able to be in a position where externally we're able to share and show the types of activities, events, whether it is very IT specific or maybe even technology specific, but then also look at culturally, what are some of the different things that we're thinking about in order to encourage disruption, to empower disruption, and make it to where it's really clear that we are looking to make use of our external voice to share and showcase the different types of activities and things that are taking place internally. To get a tech blog started, there were some things that we took on. One, like establishing the whys up front. Not only does a tech blog help you in getting that external voice out there, it does provide a mechanism for you to start new conversations with external parties, whether that be around open source, or if it's about hiring, if it's about anything within IT or otherwise, getting into a shared experience where you're able to make use of specific content and an opinion and bring that forward and use that as a means to start or continue conversations. We do source the content from our internal community, and we went through and have a bit of an internal editorial calendar that sometimes, we do have to wake some folks up and be like, hey, don't forget, there's a tech blog article that, with this topic. At the same time, though, getting it to where people see that there is this path forward for them to bring their persona, their personality, and bring it externally. people have chomped at the bit and have really expressed an appreciation for this being there for them to be able to go after and share. One of the things around the publication and the maintenance of the blog, we needed to keep it super simple. We went with Hugo, which is an open source. It's a Golang based open source static site generator. With a little bit of templating, you're able to produce a website. And ultimately, it was because of these three reasons that we went with it. We found a theme that we liked. The updates to the site itself were very easy to incorporate, and that establishing the publication, not only can the site be built, a little bit of grammar checks that we're always looking to incorporate and make a little better, and that we're able to deploy the site automatically. Made it, Hugo was just well tuned for some of the things that we wanted to do in the pipeline. And one of the third piece here, getting key stakeholders to really buy in. Our CIO Maya, she was all in when it came down to us going through and starting this out, and that and other managing directors that were in a position to be able to say, yeah, this makes a ton of sense. And if we can keep a process lightweight around an editorial calendar, around being able to publish content and involving and making sure our corporate communications friends are in a position to be able to review and be able to be involved in the publishing, we were able to get it up pretty quickly. And starting in last October was our first post was from Maya. I encourage everyone to take a look at some of the content out on tech.a.com. All right, so those are four big things, well, arguably five, but five things in the course of since I've been at American Airlines that we've been able to go after and internally get it to where we are looking at the way that we modernize our stack, the way that we collaborate within the IT and engineering community as a whole, and be able to share and showcase externally, like here's stuff that's going on. So some results I want to share. Runway. Technically, Runway started right before I joined. I became the product owner of it for about a year. And one of the early OKRs, one of the early objectives was, hey, let's make sure that the simplest thing that we could do is to just keep an eye on page views, usage, like who's going where. So over the course of the last 6 months, we double month over month the amount of usage that's coming into Runway. Now, that doesn't in itself mean like great things around the content of Runway. There are other ways that we look at that. It is more so about early on, are we able to create a website that people come to and we can see and track what types of things that they're going after to better understand what kind of requests or what kind of services does the development community want. And by doing this, we've been able to not only take those key things, and by the way, it's access control. Making access control very easy is something that Runway is definitely solidified as a key thing that we need to continue to focus in on. So now that we have that understanding, we're able to look at how do we incorporate automated access control into other elements of Runway. So it isn't like go to one part of Runway to make a request for access that then turns into now you're able to create an app and deploy. As part of your create app and deploy, can we pull in that access requirement and make it very easy to stitch those things together so that as part of a unified flow, we can, through self-service, through controls, and through automation, make it very easy for people to get the outcomes that they're after. With Tower, in 2 months, we're at roughly 40% of our application portfolios plugged in. The reason the number, 40% of the total, and still within the 2 months, there's definitely a portion of the portfolio that's sort of in keep the lights on. The only time that any of our application teams need to call Tower is when they're doing a production deployment. We have a section of or segment of our portfolio that hasn't made a production deployment in the last 2 months. And so that's cool because like they're steady state. They just do what they do. We also have a set of applications where it's not quite clear what does it mean for them to change production? Because they're more maybe data management oriented as opposed to infrastructure. So the next like 20% of applications going into Tower is refining what does it mean for them to have a production change. What's great though is that the great thing about this is that we have clearer insight into the types of deployments, the frequency of deployments, to where we are looking at making use of this as a measure in some of our KPIs. How do we incorporate it against change management records? Are we able to, or how do we go about verifying that vulnerabilities, team monitoring and on-call, self-healing checks are different components to be able to pull back into Tower to say, is this application as a whole in a position to be able to, if something happened, everything is in a really good place, and this deployment definitely should be going out to prod. InterSource, I believe it was right around 2.5 years ago that InterSource started at American Airlines, well before my time, and a wonderful program. One of the things, and I mentioned it when I was talking about InterSource, is so in that 2.5 years, we're right at about 97 projects that have been InterSourced. And that is only growing, not only in the count of projects, but also the reuse of projects that are solving problems, making it very easy for teams to move things forward. In open source, the working group is over 20 members now. There are multiple, we have multiple organizations on GitHub, and the one that we publish our open source projects on is at American Airlines. Please, I encourage everyone, github.com/American Airlines, take a look. Because of our contributions, or because of the desire to contribute into open source communities and open source non-differentiating projects, things that we find to be useful, but it isn't like how we fly our planes or how we manage our networks or anything. We're finding that there is a ton of excitement about when engineers are in a position to be able to share and showcase the way that we engineer and the way that we look to solve problems. And open source is a way to tap into that excitement and make it to where engineers are really excited about doing IT work. And for TechBlog, one of the early going with TechBlog, the editorial calendar, we had a spike of content and people ready. We are continuing to normalize that and get it to where we have approximately once a month cadence. So that way we've got content coming out at least once a month about a particular thing that is the way that we are transforming, the way that we are connecting with maybe our customer, the way that our business and IT is coming together to form, a cohesive unit, and the way that we're looking to continue to be disruptive in our market. And so, wrapping it up, one of the things around disruption that I want to be clear on is that there are some instead ofs and more ofs to highlight. I've hit on many of these things as part of this talk. One of them being like reactive governance and shifting towards guided choice. When we bias towards innovation, make it to where technology, data, and process shifts towards how do you make that more autonomously self-service and continue to balance it with controls. We are doing it with Runway. We're making it to where we're able to implement and influence an approach to a quick way for people to get a quality deployment started and be able to launch their feature in more robust and safe ways. Instead of project milestones, shifting towards product features. I talked about some of the change elements and shifting towards a product mindset, that autonomy around guided choice and moving into product features is where you're going to be able to start to do more autonomous experimentation and exploration of the types of features that customers are going to be delighted by. And if it's an experiment that proves itself to not be something that is worthy or something that should continue, the customer feedback loop to that product feature is going to come through more clear if the product team is closer to the customer via their product. Instead of approval gates, automated checks and guardrails. This is where when we talk about principles, we talk about the practices and patterns, and we say as code for as many of these standards as possible. We look to do all of these things through automated processes in our CI/CD pipeline. Any place where we're able to introduce a new test or a new place to validate that our architecture, our data, our implementations are sane, CI/CD and that automation is where we look to incorporate all that. And that means we look at these things from an as code perspective. And then platform anchors, instead of platform anchors, more open standards. Now, this isn't just about open source. Open standards opens it up to more things. For example, in integration architecture, instead of making use of proprietary clients and proprietary protocols, stay as close to possible to open standards that allow you to interchange technology without affecting that architecture, which means the flexibility of that architecture will help around experimentation, around innovation, and be less disrupted during that disruption. So with that, I want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to present. Again, my name is Jason Walker. I'm director with American Airlines, and I want to thank you for your time.